When it launched in 2016, the original 3T Exploro was a category-busting aero gravel bike, and it's fair to say the reaction at the time was fairly mixed, but in the years since it's been embraced by speed-loving gravel racers. In 2020 we had the welcome addition of the Race Max with even bigger tyre clearance, but in my opinion didn't go quite far enough. Now though, we have the Exploro Ultra and it does go far enough. We now have space for much wider tyres, mountain bike tyres in fact, as you can see here, and that change massively increases the capability of this bike when you're riding off-road on rough gravel tracks and woodland trails whilst retaining the speed of the original. So in this video I'll share my thoughts on what this bike is like to ride on my local trails here in the Cotswolds. A mix of gravel and woodland trails with roots and rocks and a few cheeky mountain bike trails here and there. Do the big tyres really improve the capability, and has it lost any of the speed of the original that made it so popular over the years? But first, let's go through some of the details and changes of the bike before we get stuck in to riding it. To the casual observer, this new Exploro Ultra looks just like the Race Max and the original launched back in 2016. We still have this very distinctive aero down tube and these skinny drop rear stays and this distinctive cable routing on the top tube here, more on that in a bit. But they've massively improved the tyre clearance. So now you can fit up to a 61mm wide tyre on a 650B wheel or a 46 on a 700C wheel. And that's using WAM width as measured, a system introduced by Gerard Ruman, the designer behind the bike, to try and make it easier to fit the right size tyres on different rims on a bike you are buying, because different rim and tyre combination can come out wider or narrower depending on those combinations. So WAM is a system trying to make that easier. So 61 or 46 depending on your wheel size. And that is much more generous than the Race Max I rode last year, which wasn't the most generous when it came to tyre clearance. Now talking clearance, we do have more space around the fork and the rear stays, but these tyres really max out the available space, and mud clearance, as with the Race Max, still looks pretty limited. But testing this bike in the summer, it hasn't been that muddy at all, so I've not been able to test the mud clearance at all. Hopefully it'll be better, but you can always run a narrow tyre. Go to a 700 by 42 and you have more mud clearance for sure. So the bigger tyres are good, and to accommodate the bigger tyres we have a slightly modified frame. So slightly longer chainstays and longer wheelbase to allow the bigger tyres to fit. And we also have a fatter down tube than before to try and retain the aerodynamic properties even with the bigger tyres fitted. But can you really have aerodynamics with such massive tyres? Well, 3T think you do. When the Exploro first launched, it was the first of a kind to bring aerodynamics to a gravel bike. And it was met then, and it's still met now, with a fairly mixed and cynical reaction. Can a gravel bike and gravel riding really benefit from aerodynamics? Well, it's clear in events like Unbound, which are getting pretty serious and pretty fast, that aero is going to be a factor. And we're seeing bikes like the Villiers Rave and the Pinarello Gravel and other examples really trying to push the benefits of aero in a gravel package, but Exploro was the first of its kind. Now, I clearly don't have a wind tunnel to verify the aerodynamic properties of this new bike, but 3T does maintain that even with the bigger tyres, there are aero benefits to be had on a bike like this, especially when compared to a mountain bike with similar tyres fitted. And for riding road and smooth gravel at higher speeds, which a bike like this can enable, then the aero benefits are going to be there. Maybe smaller and maybe harder to measure, but they will still be there. But really, there's only one way to find out how the bike performs, how it handles chunky off-road terrain, and how fast it is or isn't, is by going for a spin. These fat tyres are a game changer on the 3T Exploro. Absolutely transform the bike, give it so much better off-road capability. I've always loved and hated the 3T Exploro in equal measure. Fast on the road and smooth gravel, but not quite as at home on technical rough trails as other bikes in the category. But now though, these fat tyres transform it into a monster truck off-road. With the tyres rolling on 20 psi, you can steamroll through every rough section of gravel, roots, rocks, whatever it is, and it just takes it all in its stride. You can't really do that on a 40mm 700C setup. So much more comfort, so much more control, so much more fun. Of course, it's no surprise that bigger tyres are better when it comes to riding off-road, whether mountain bikes or gravel bikes, but these fat tyres do go a long way to making the 3T Exploro a more enjoyable bike and a more versatile bike for tackling a wider range of terrain. So the big tyres are good, definitely transform the ability and capability of the bike. So now you can not hold back when you see a rough section of trail, the roots, the rocks, just plough through it, the tyres handle it fine. I do wonder how these tyres would compare to a 700/40 setup with a suspension fork. The big tyres do give you lots of natural suspension, but it can be quite bouncy sometimes. There's no rebound control like you get on a suspension fork. So with a small tyre with a suspension fork, with it damping, offer a better setup. I think that's a question to answer in a future video. But the easy way to get more comfort and more capability on a gravel bike is to naturally go to a bigger tyre. The downside perhaps is you do lose some of that top end speed compared to a 700/40 setup. These tyres are noticeably draggier and noisier on smoother gravel and on the road, but the bike, despite these tyres, is still fast. It still trucks on the road really well. And for the riding I do, which requires riding from my front door on roads before I get to the woods, having the speed of the bike, which is much faster than a mountain bike in my experience, gives you a bike that won't hold you back, won't be a sluggish bike when you are doing those kind of linking road sections before you get to the fun woodland trails, which I'm riding right now. Now of course, I don't have a wind tunnel to really see what the aero benefits of the bike are actually like, and it's really tricky testing aerodynamics here in the real world, especially on a gravel bike when you're riding off-road on slippery, challenging terrain. So I can't really talk about the aero benefits too much. I mean, it certainly feels fast. We've got the low weight, just under 9 kilos in the top end build, and it's very stiff as well, very stiff around the bottom brackets. So power transfer is excellent. It really transfers all your watts into forward motion with no delay. So it's a fast bike. It's got that kind of snappy ride quality that you want from a speed focused gravel bike and won't hold you up at all. These tyres probably aren't as fast as a 700/40 or 42 setup, but you can have 2 sets of wheels and tyres on the bike. Have these for the weekend when you play around in the woods, and fit some faster rolling rubber for your racing events when you want that high speed ability, and more mud clearance as well, because mud clearance with these tyres does look pretty tight, but luckily it's dry now, so the mud isn't a problem. All that said though, the 3T Exploro is still an interesting bike. There are more aero gravel bikes on the market now, and we're seeing gravel racing getting really serious, especially in the US. The aerodynamics are naturally going to be a bigger kind of concern going forward for many manufacturers, especially those embracing the racing scene. But can you really have aero and such fat tyres? Well, based on my experience, it seems to work pretty well. Let me run you through the build on this bike. And it's fair to say that 3T bikes have never been, shall we say, an affordable option. Definitely a premium product, and that's reflected in the price. So a frame set will set you back for £3,000. Complete build start from £5,700. And this bike here, the top of the range model with a full smattering of carbon fibre components, costs a heady £8,700. But the result of all that carbon fibre, wheels, cranks and other bits and bobs means it weighs just under 9 kilograms, which for an aero gravel bike with a massive down tube and big chunky tyres is pretty impressive, and does contribute to the way the bike rides. Absolutely flies up the climbs and flies along flat, fast gravel trails. And it is a pretty amazing build as well, and the parts I love about it. These Vittoria tyres, not the fastest rolling, but give you amazing grip when it's a bit loose, and you really chuck the bike into kind of rowdy situations and they handle it all fine. I'm running about 20 psi front and rear, so pretty low, same as I run on a mountain bike. We then have fat, wide, carbon fibre 3T discus wheels, which look really good. Nice wide profile for these tyres. Then we have 3T's own very bling, very exotic carbon fibre single ring chain set there, which I think looks amazing. but I would be worried about durability, smashing rocks into it if I had it myself. And then a SRAM Force Eagle mullet setup, so a 1050 cassette, amazing on the climbs, gives you all the range you really need, and wireless gearing just works like a dream. On such a high-end build, there are a few things to gripe about, but I found a couple for you. The first one is the cable routing here, which I really dislike, and it's almost enough to put me off buying the bike, which is a real shame. You might feel differently, let me know down below. The other small gripe is the dropper seat post, which is a lovely Crank Brothers carbon fibre one on this bike. This shaft here is carbon fibre, very bling, very expensive, but very lightweight. But personally, I'm sat on the fence around the benefits of a dropper seat post on a gravel bike. Granted, these bigger tyres do give you the ability, the scope to ride more technical steep trails where a dropper seat post can be deployed. But on a gravel bike, I'm still not sure that the benefits outweigh the cost and the weight. But for me personally, I'd rather have the comfort benefits of a bendy carbon fibre seat post for the majority of the riding I do on a gravel bike, rather than the 1 or 2 times on a ride I might actually use and benefit from a dropper seat post. On a mountain bike, a dropper seat post 100% yes. On a gravel bike, I'm not so sure. The other small possible gripe, not for me personally, but for you at home watching perhaps, is the press fit bottom bracket. I don't really have many problems with press fit generally, but we are seeing more manufacturers move to threaded bottom brackets, and I can see the argument, the case for a threaded bottom bracket on a gravel bike for the simpler maintenance and kind of fixing a problem out in the field away from home. So that might be an issue for you, but let me know down below. But there are some positives as well, and it's worth highlighting the fact the bike now comes with a round 27.2 seat post inside an aero seat post. The Race Max came with an aero seat post, which not everybody was a fan of, especially the clamp. So now you fit any round seat post you want, whether a drop post, a normal carbon post, or a suspension seat post even. So a real thumbs up for 3T there, a really smart move. So next, they can work on the cable routing. The shift to bigger tyres on the new 3T Exploro Ultra is definitely a good thing and gives the bike a much needed boost in off-road capability. Where the previous Race Max was stiff and uncomfortable on anything but smooth gravel, this new bike, thanks to these wide tyres at low pressure, gives you much more scope, much more bandwidth for tackling everything away from smooth gravel. Woodland trails, rocks, roots, tame mountain bike trails, the sort of riding I like to do. But yet, we still have a ton of speed from the aero optimized frame and the geometry of this bike compared to a mountain bike. And for me, this bike still works. I ride from my front door on roads to get to the woods, and having that speed of a bike like this on a road before I get to the woods and then have the capability of the fat tyres works really well. So who is this bike for then? Is it for you? Well, I think if you're a rider who loves going fast but wants some comfort and you're concerned about your time from A to B and you're happy to have some minimal bike packing bags, this is definitely the bike for you. And if you want to see some other reviews of gravel bikes, because this one maybe doesn't float your boat, then check this video playlist up here. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again very soon.